The next session is the subject of economic benefits of service, both the national benefit and the individual benefit. Ms. Minnerva Zhou will make the presentation.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello again. My name is Minnerva Zhou, and I will be presenting on the individual and national economic benefits of service programs. So we'll first begin by examining the individual benefits of service programs. In military service programs, there has been mixed results on the economic benefit after service. In some cases, it was found that military service had no significant effect on the income of those who served, while in other studies, such as one in South Korea, found that there were increased earnings following service. It is notable that there may be a loss in lifetime earnings for those that are conscripted. In the case of Denmark, those in the Danish military earned 2.5% less than those who have not served in the 10 years following service. In civil service programs, there's a correlation between volunteering and higher income following volunteering, particularly for youth. For those aged 16 to 24, incomes are 12% higher for volunteers than for non-volunteers. One other example of benefits in national service programs is with the national service program Americorps. It is found that those in the Americorps program have a higher likelihood to find success in public service employment. Looking at other examples of how service programs affect individual earnings, we note that in the military, veterans were found to have higher poverty levels and lower social welfare in comparison to non-veterans in the 15 years following service in the Vietnam War. In civil service, if we look at Americorps again, it is notable that the average yearly stipend for those in the program is about $14,520 a year. Now, benefits are not necessarily only about the dollars you earn or other monetary metrics. It is also important to consider the social and community benefits, particularly with civil service programs. Those that participate in civil service programs were found to have reduced delinquency and substance abuse in the years following participation. Also, there were generally better health statuses among volunteers, particularly with younger people aged 16 to 24. Recall that the average yearly stipend for those in Americorps is about $14,000 per year. Service programs often provide some sort of support to be economically sustainable for those involved. However, this brings up a question. Should the economic support from service programs be the same for all, or should there be a sliding scale based on need? While there is not much scientific evidence pertaining to this topic, it is similar to another question. Should college be universally free or provide need-based financial aid? Looking at the data on universal funding, it is found that students in the top 25% of family wealth receive 18% of free tuition benefits while making up roughly 11% of the public college population. Meanwhile, students within the bottom 25% of family wealth receive 16% of free tuition benefits. For need-based financial aid, differences in financial aid amounts affect students in the bottom half of the income distribution the most. Particularly, increases in funding for those students are correlated with academic persistence and higher likelihoods to graduate. We will now examine the national benefits of service programs. In the short term, we find that an increase in volunteering is correlated with a temporary rise in administrative costs, but in the long term, there is a 0.07% decrease in government spending associated with 1% increase of volunteers in public service. The total social expenditures on civil national service for roughly 80,000 youth members is about $1.65 billion. Expanding this national service program to reach 250,000 members would require roughly $5 billion. In this expansion, the social benefit cost ratio would increase from 3.9 to 4.6 due to decreasing unit costs. This higher ratio means that there would be more benefits from things like reduction of the burden of delinquency on welfare systems per cost. So as a quick recap here, there are mixed results on the economic benefits of military service programs. In civil service programs, there's a correlation between volunteering and higher income, particularly with youth. Current civil service programs have lower monetary gains, such as with Americorps member stipends, though they often have more social benefits. And it is also notable that the debate for economic funding for individuals in service programs is similar to that of the debate for providing free or need-based college. Key takeaways for the national benefits of civil service programs is that in the short term, an increase in volunteering is often associated with an increase in administrative costs, while in the long term, an increase in volunteering is often associated with a decrease in government spending. Expanding existing civil national service programs to affect 250,000 members from 80,450 would require $5 billion, but may also increase the social benefit to cost ratio from 3.9 to 4.6. Thus ends this presentation. Thank you.
Since you just mentioned it, I think I'll ask a question right off the bat. Could you back up one slide, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
I wanted to see the next. Yeah, okay. You talk about social benefit cost ratio from 3.9 to 4.6. Could you explain that a little bit more for us and for the jury so that we understand that measurement and what it means?
Yeah, so the benefit to cost ratio is calculated, or in the social benefit to cost ratio, it's calculated from the value of things like such as arising from the reduction of the burden of delinquency that would otherwise be paid through like criminal justice or welfare systems. So a higher benefit to cost ratio would indicate that there are more social benefits calculated from these things, such as like the value of improved health status and the burden I just mentioned per cost. So in this case, a higher ratio would mean more benefits per cost, if that makes sense.
Thank you. We may have more questions on that one because it's an important concept as to how effective these programs are going to be and in what way. Now we will have questions from the legal teams. Mr. Sunthrolingham will ask questions on behalf of the pro team.
Thank you, Your Honor. Minnerva, thank you for your presentation. I have 3 questions for you. You mentioned about military service and how it's linked to negative financial implications. Does the study or does your research explicitly state that it's due to the mandatory nature of the service, or does it rule out the possibility of, especially in service during the Vietnam War, due to psychological impacts of serving in active duty? Yeah, that's the first question.
It is not specifically on the mandatory aspect, no.
Okay.
For that study in
Thank
particular.
You. Second question, you also refer to military service, but not all of it is mentioned explicitly to be mandatory. Could it be that's also related, like some just general choice, military service by choice could be linked to negative financial implications?
In all of the studies considered, it has been mandatory in that all the members in the studies that were studied were conscripted. So in that case, it was mandatory.
All right, and my third question, final question would be, when you talk about the benefits of civil service and how it's related to positive financial implications, does it explicitly state as the reason being the choice of volunteering, or due to the skills you gain, as we learned from Jenny previously, that would be the same under voluntary or mandatory?
It is more so towards the skills you gain, as you mentioned in the latter half of that question.
Thanks, Minnerva. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Stankiewicz.
Thank you, Your Honor. Minnerva, would you be able to tell us whether the introduction of private companies for service decreases the government cost at all?
Unfortunately, it's difficult to conduct science to compare the impact of government investment and private sector, like private company investment. So as of now, I have found no research in any industry that directly compares the costs of these. However, I can look more on that for you.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Stankiewicz, they have questions for you from the jury. First question, I'll try and present it properly. The voluntary program provides significant monetary and healthcare types of attractions or incentives to join the programs. And those might appeal more to people in a more financially challenged demographic. How does the con side work on attracting people in somewhat equal numbers demographically, but independent of wealth and in terms of background, so that we don't end up with participation in the voluntary programs being skewed to people who select the program solely for economic benefits?
Yes, so just to clarify, the question is, how are we planning to attract people of differing like socioeconomic levels?
Yes.
Okay, that's a wonderful question. So I think those of us in this class and probably in the jury are aware of how expensive college is in the student debt crisis. And I believe that we all know that this affects people of differing socioeconomic levels. So I believe that that is really the first point. Additionally, people who perhaps don't need assistance in paying for college or in health insurance will still be gaining beneficial skills for their jobs. It would be the same reason why somebody would perhaps do an unpaid internship. However, we would pay people and give them a stipend. So we would have lots of different incentives for different socioeconomic levels, so that people can gain the skills as well as work with different communities.
Another question from the jury: how does the volunteer program avoid overlap or deal with overlap of types of programs from any existing established services, whether governmental or totally volunteer? In other words, how do you deal with that intersection or overlap?
So the beautiful thing about the voluntary program is that we would be including existing programs under our umbrella. We would not be creating a whole new governmental program that would overlap with the Peace Corps, or United Nations Peacekeepers, or Teach for America. Those programs would be incorporated into our voluntary service. So because of this, there would not be much overlap because those programs would already be a part of the service.
Thank you. And now we'll have statements. Mr. Soon-Throllingham, your statement for the pro side.
Thank you, Anna. I'd like to start by stressing that even though it's been clear that military service through Minnerva's presentation and even Philip before that can be linked to negative health or to negative financial implications, we on the pro team do not think that it's reflective of the mandatory nature of our service, but rather how skills gained in the military is valued in society on the economic front and on the health front, on how veterans receive treatment after service. And in terms, I want to make it explicitly clear also that in terms of positive financial implications for volunteering is a direct result of skills, as you heard from Minnerva and Jenny before that. And we on the mandatory service would maintain that. Now, if we just extrapolate from what we heard Minnerva talk about, how much it would cost, we estimate that the cost of our program for mandating millions of Americans a year could be anywhere from like tens of billions of dollars to up to $100 billion. Now that sounds like a lot, but let's put this in context. America currently spends $190 billion on obesity related issues. Is mandatory service going to solve all of it? Maybe. America currently has a 10.5 level poverty rate according to the CDC. If you extend this to our service, about 10% of the people we mandate into service would be below the poverty line. And by giving them a stipend, we not only improve food and housing security, it's also important to note that these people would be in different towns across the country, towns that may have been neglected through decades of economic change. And these towns would benefit from economic activity through the financial stipend. And these implications, it can be hard to put a number on. But the point I'm trying to make is that on an economic, on a personal, on a social level, the financial implications are not just limited in terms of having millions of people get paid and paid to do service. There could be immense amounts of savings in terms of fulfilling public needs in local communities. And so therefore, we think it's important to keep things in perspective. And a mandatory service, while giving people the choice to whether enlist in the military or choose civilian service, we believe number one would have economic benefits to the individual, but more importantly, would still stick to the core reason of our proposal, which is to reduce polarization. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stankovitz.
Thank you, Your Honor. The first thing that I want to point out in the last presentation is the fact that that studies showed that those conscripted into the military saw a loss in earnings. Now, clearly, I don't think that either side would like people to join their program and thus make less money in the future. However, how do we ensure that people continue to make the same amount that they would had there been no mandatory service, as well as ensure that they are potentially making even more money? Well, that's where the voluntary service comes in. It adds a little bit of competition. And if you've taken economics, you know that competition is important, especially when it comes to wages. So thus, people in the voluntary program would be gaining these new skills that would make them competitive within their industry, not only through their technical skills, but also the skills that their soft skills that they had learned. Furthermore, as Minnerva stated, long-term service was associated with a decrease in government spending. So while the upfront cost might be high, we believe that a depolarized society is completely worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes this particular session.